Before this video begins, I would like to give a quick thank you to my Asban Team level patrons Fallon Cortez and Nathan Gibson. Thank you so much for supporting the channel. Have you ever looked at a piece of art that gives off major uncanny valley vibes? Maybe the proportions aren't quite right, or the face just looks a little bit wrong. Sometimes this is because of a skill issue, sometimes it's intentional for surrealism. But what if art was more than we thought? Imagine if art itself was alive and we had no idea. Well, that's the concept behind the incredible Doctor Who episode Flatline, where mysterious aliens from the second dimension begin to invade Earth, and it's up to Clara to take charge as the Doctor finds himself trapped inside a handbag-sized TARDIS. It's a fantastic episode, even by 12th Doctor standards, but what makes it so great? Well, as always, that's what I'm here to find out. So take a seat, or don't, and join me as I take a deep dive into Doctor Who Series 8's Flatline, an episode where art itself is a villain. No, not that episode. We don't talk about that one.
Yes, I get it, you're excited. When can I go home?
Flatline begins with an absolutely incredible hook as the Doctor and Clara land all the way in not so sunny Bristol rather than their intended destination. This is pretty par for the course, but what makes it so interesting is how the TARDIS begins to immediately shrink upon arrival. Hey, it's not usually that small, I swear, it's just cold. We later find out that the reason for this shrinkage is because the evil Boneless are leeching power from it, which is a nice explanation for the gimmick. However, the true reason for this was because Flatline was filmed alongside Matheson's other Series 8 episode, Mummy on the Orient Express. This double banking production method was commonplace in Doctor Who at the time, so naturally each episode limited the screen time of one of the main actors. Trapping the 12th Doctor inside the rapidly shrinking TARDIS is a really novel and interesting way of achieving this, especially considering how the phenomenon would have originally been reversed quite quickly by the Doctor, which would have prevented the episode exploring this concept to its full potential.
It's bigger on the inside.
You know, I don't think that statement's ever been truer.
Flatline does so much with this idea. Not only is it an immediately iconic visual seeing the familiar sight of the TARDIS reduced to a mere toy, but it creates the perfect blend of comedy and drama. We get to see the Doctor's massive face peering through the tiny doors, and his hands scuttling the time machine along like the Addams Family. There's the sledgehammer coming out of Clara's bag, and all sorts of other great visual gags taking full advantage of the TARDIS being so small. However, it's not just about the humour of shrinking the time machine down, it's also a way of injecting a lot of immediate alienness into the episode, creating a tantalising mystery about what's causing this and how.
And for the race that built the TARDIS, dimensions are kind of our thing.
It's a prime example of compressing space, which is part of the core of the episode, and the fact that even the TARDIS isn't immune builds up the threat of the Boneless, especially as the Doctor becomes completely isolated, trapped in siege mode with no escape, creating some delightfully high stakes.
Life support failing.
I also really appreciate how much it eliminates the Doctor from the narrative and makes him feel so useless because he can't get involved like he usually does. He's forced onto the sidelines, rather ironically having to watch everything on the 2D view screen in the console room. The Doctor doesn't really feel like he's taken a backseat though, still spouting his usual sarcastic quips and one-liners to great effect.
Hello, barely sentient local.
Another Doctor?
How do you sleep at night?
It's almost like he feels humiliated at quite literally being made so small, with a sense of indignation at his predicament. After all, he's the Doctor, a larger-than-life heroic figure. He's used to striding along and stealing the spotlight, but now he's just a big man in a small box, which drives him crazy.
Oh my god, that is so adorable. Are you in there?
Yes, I have. No, it's not adorable.
So naturally, with the Doctor out of commission, his companion Clara is propelled into the forefront of the action, having to assume his role in a very literal sense.
I'm the Doctor.
Don't you dare.
This is obviously a big part of her overall story arc, the payoff to something that has been building ever since she first met the Doctor in the Bells of St. John. As Clara grows closer to the Doctor and she gets more and more used to life alongside him, she begins to aspire to become just like him. A lot of people think this aspect of her character is just thrown in suddenly without any setup, but it was always there, starting off very subtle in Series 7B before growing to this initial crescendo in Flatline.
Does this mean I'm you now?
No, it does not. So don't get any ideas.
Each episode has been building up Clara's confidence and sense of independence, with her playing more of a central role in saving the day. This all lays the foundation for Clara to easily slide into the position of the Doctor, taking control of the situation with no fear or hesitation. It's really a fascinating direction for Flatline to take, using this Doctor-like format as a way of furthering Clara's own storyline.
Welcome to my world. So what's next, Dr. Clara?
Jenna Coleman does a truly fantastic job, and shows just how well she could play her own incarnation of the Doctor. There's all the charisma and confidence you expect from the character, along with that firm self-assurance and sense of belief, but it never becomes pompous or holier than thou as the Doctor themselves can sometimes come across. So it's safe to say that Clara brings her own unique personal charm to being the Doctor.
My Dr. Oswald, you are hilarious.
It's undeniable that there's a lot of great comedy that comes from Clara's impersonation of her time-travelling alien best friend, leading to some memorable lines and iconic moments.
What are you a doctor of?
Of lies.
But the core of it is that character evolution as she's forced to actually walk the walk. It's not just limited to her calling herself the Doctor, and her being given the psychic paper and sonic screwdriver is very symbolic of this. She has to step into his shoes and try to do what she thinks he'd do in this situation. It's the kind of test the Doctor tried to put her through in Kill the Moon, but this time it's a lot more natural and voluntary, compared to that episode where he literally abandoned her at the last minute with the fate of the entire moon in the balance. This at least starts off a little bit lower stakes. I feel like being given this responsibility in Flatline allows her to understand and appreciate what it really takes to live this lifestyle and all the difficult decisions you have to make in order to survive.
Lie to them. Give them hope. Tell them they're all going to be fine, isn't that what you would do?
It's fitting that Flatline comes after Mummy on the Orient Express, which went to great effort to highlight the risk management aspect of the Doctor. It's so easy to sit back and criticise the 12th Doctor for his seemingly callous disregard for the people around him, but like he admitted at the end of that episode, sometimes there is no easy decision, no right choice to make. Clara finds this out firsthand as she's propelled into the leadership position, taking charge of a group of defenceless everyday people and having to protect them. Having to live this all directly completely recontextualizes Clara's view of the 12th Doctor. She finally understands what it actually means to be the Doctor, the sacrifices it requires, and the burden of responsibility. Sometimes it's necessary to be a bit heartless and rational to survive. There's no room for the 12th Doctor to be too emotional and personal, because he has to keep everyone else around him alive, and now Clara has to too. Into the Dalek and the Caretaker made jokes about Clara being the Doctor's moral compass, but there's truth to it because he doesn't have time to care. He has lives to save. By being put in this position, Clara can now accept and properly understand the necessary pragmatism that comes with being the Doctor.
I am the one chance you've got of staying alive. That's who I am.
And of course, if you're going to be the Doctor, you need a companion, which Clara finds in the young graffiti artist Rixie.
Oh, he's a bright one. Hang on to him.
I really like Rixie. He's a very grounded and realistic character we can relate to. He's just a guy, which creates some interesting early interactions between him and Clara, set to the backdrop of a very mundane and grey urban estate. After multiple years of wild outer space or international adventures, there's something strangely refreshing about returning to the recognisable setting of urban life Series 1 had revelled in with the Powell estate. Seeing community service workers and disused railways would feel a bit drab and dull in most shows like these, but it actually works so well in Doctor Who because of this exact boringness. It grounds the episode in reality and further illustrates how much of a difference there is between life with the Doctor and everyday life back at home. Rixie couldn't be any more different from the Doctor, so he fits this episode perfectly. Jovan Wade's performance is very authentic and charming, breathing so much life into Rixie. Rixie isn't your stereotypical graffiti spraying youth. Instead, this is a form of self-expression and genuine art to him. He's not doing it to be some kind of vandal. This is a legitimate debate which has been going on for decades, with some people claiming all graffiti is vandalism and an eyesore, while others claim it's just as valid as a watercolour painting or a pencil sketch. And I've always found myself sitting somewhere in the middle, since obviously a lot of graffiti can be ugly, destructive and uncalled for, but it's also true that there's a lot of beautiful graffiti that deserves to be respected and remain intact. This debate is illustrated as the despicable Fenton orders Rigsy to erase his own signature, something that represents his very sense of identity and creativity. To put it in a hyperbolic way, this is like an execution Fenton is forcing Rigsy to carry out on himself. Christopher Fairbank almost does too good of a job as Fenton, a character so thoroughly unlikable you almost forget he's not real.
This is blank. Try again, sweetheart.
What?
Fenton feels so real because this is a type of person everyone meets at some point in their lives. He has a permanent sneer and feeling of self-importance as he lords over the people doing community service. He believes he's above them and better than them, and it's perfectly frustrating as he constantly makes bitter remarks throughout the episode.
They were community payback scumbags. I wouldn't lose any sleep.
I also feel like there are some deliberate undertones of racism with how Fenton treats Rigsy specifically, compared to the others in the group. He almost targets and profiles Rigsy for his age and skin colour, and this adds to the unpleasantness of Fenton as a character. Interestingly enough, early drafts explain Fenton's bitterness as being because he himself had once been anti-authority too, which means his hatred of Rigsy is almost like a projection of his own self-hatred. Even though there's barely any actual characterization to both Fenton and Rigsy, and barely any at all for the rest of the community service workers, the acting is so phenomenal that it adds a lot of unspoken depth to these two people. Their nature as like general archetypes of characters does most of the legwork because they're designed to coast by on how familiar they are as relatable figures. And because I have nowhere else to make this obvious joke,
Oh, Jesus Christ! Fenton!
unfortunately, one of the best scenes between Fenton and Rigsy was actually cut from the episode, surviving as a deleted scene released much later. It takes place early on in the tunnels, with the Doctor boosting Clara's phone signal to allow the supporting characters to call their loved ones, since the chances of survival are so slim. It leads to a rare moment of common existence for Rigsy and Fenton, since Rigsy claims he has no one to call, and Fenton suggests he could place the call for him in exchange for Rigsy doing the same for him. It's implied that Fenton's call would have been to the mother of his daughter, and I think this humanises this jaded and almost comically antagonistic character a lot. It shows how underneath this bitter man, there's a sense of vulnerability and regret. It's not a scene which redeems him or justifies his despicable behaviour, but it makes him feel like much more of a complex and layered figure. So it's a huge shame it was cut. There is merit for making a character so thoroughly hateable though, especially because Fenton survives the adventure, a decision actually made quite late on in the development process. Having a character like this survive whilst nicer, more deserving characters die is something the show had previously explored with Rixton Slade in Voyage of the Damned, and I appreciate how it comes up again here.
Yes, a lot of people died and maybe the wrong people survived.
No one should have the power to decide who is and isn't deserving of survival, because that's an absolute ethical and moral minefield. Not even the Doctor should be allowed to make that kind of decision, which is another lesson Clara learns by taking over his role and responsibilities. Sometimes the wrong people survive, and that's sadly just another cold hard truth of this lifestyle, along with real life too a lot of the time. Okay, so I've said a lot about the characters of the story, but the monsters of Flatline are just as much of a focus. Writer Jamie Matheson was a long-time fan of Doctor Who, and had unsuccessful discussions about writing for the show at the beginning of the first Russell T Davies era in 2004, and again at the beginning of the Stephen Moffat era in 2010. To be fair, it's not a surprise given one of his only credits was an episode of My Parents Are Aliens. Hey, we've all got to start somewhere. However, by 2013, Matheson's work on shows like Being Human and Dirk Gently had caught the eye of Moffat's wife Sue, who was also a television producer. This time, Matheson's pitches gained Moffat's approval, leading to the showrunner suggesting this idea of two-dimensional monsters invading a three-dimensional universe. Because, of course, Moffat would come up with this concept. That man could turn a piece of chewing gum into a terrifying Doctor Who monster.
Are we really hiding from Killer Graffiti? This is insane.
To say the boneless are an incredible concept would be an absolutely freezing cold take, because pretty much everyone is in unanimous agreement that it's such a phenomenal idea for a villain. They're drawn from a lot of existing pieces of art, like the perspective trickery of the 1533 painting The Ambassadors, the 4th Sapphire and Steel serial, and even Flat Stanley. Yeah, even this goofy ass kids book played a big role in inspiring this incredible episode. The boneless are absolutely terrifying right from the beginning of the episode. There's just something so chilling about how they move, manipulating the very art they're hiding within. It's really surreal to see these visuals as carpets absorb people, and the boneless crush 3D objects into 2D. It's an incredibly well realised monster, and I think they're so effective because of how simple their premise is. Doctor Who has a habit of making these everyday monsters. The Weeping Angels are just statues, the Empty Child was just a child wearing a gas mask, Autons are mannequins. You get the gist. It's one of the best parts of the show, this ability to make its viewers fear basically anything you can see within a 10-meter radius of you at any given time. And yet, despite being so familiar with their artistic appearances, the boneless feel more alien than ever because they're so wildly beyond our human frame of reference.
But from a universe with only 2 dimensions.
The boneless work so well because they're removed from our realm of understanding, and we have no way to really comprehend their very existence, making them so unnerving. One of Matheson's inspirations for the episode was the 1884 novella Flatline, a story about the inhabitants of worlds with different levels of dimensions. The novella was meant to be a commentary on Victorian culture, but its exploration of dimensions and maths make it memorable, and that's what Matheson draws from in this episode, exploring this concept of 2D beings trying to understand and comprehend the third dimension we live in. Throughout Flatline, it's as if the boneless are experimenting on humans and dissecting them. It makes a lot of sense that they would have no idea how to understand us. Just like we can't comprehend the boneless start off as incapable of comprehending humans. Because yeah, you know, we just look like moving lines to them. This leads to them reducing a police officer to a diagram of a nervous system on a wall, and some random dude becomes a blown up image of human skin. They do all this horrifying and brutal stuff, but because of the lack of being able to understand them, it's entirely possible for the first half of the episode that these creatures aren't malicious or evil. We have no idea of their true intentions, and that almost makes them scarier than most other Doctor Who monsters, because you don't know why they're doing what they're doing.
But here's the big question. Do they know they're hurting us?
It creates a fascinating mystery about whether the boneless are simply trying to communicate the only way they know how, even if that is, you know, sucking people into the floor and walls. It's not exactly the best way to make a first impression, although saying that, the first thing my girlfriend ever said to me was, ew, so I can't exactly judge. Anyway, regardless of whether they mean well or not, it's undeniable that the boneless play a very antagonistic role as they relentlessly pursue the protagonist, picking them off one by one. I absolutely adore the initial scene of the murals turning around. It's such a chilling and impactful moment with great special effects, and it really stands out as an iconic scene within the episode. This slick and impressive penny drop moment. Sure, it was always quite obvious that the mural wasn't what it seemed, but the reveal is perfectly executed and a fun way to add some intensity to the episode. Flatline's directing is a big part of why it's such a great episode. Douglas McKinnon had previously brought a lot of cinematic flair to Listen and Time Heist, so it's no surprise that he does another phenomenal job with Flatline. His vision brings a huge sense of atmosphere to the episode. From that urban greyness I mentioned earlier, to the dark and oppressive tunnels of the railway line, Flatline is a visually striking episode through and through. I love the intense action as the train is bearing down on the TARDIS, the episode providing a really immersive sense of speed and drama. However, I personally prefer the scene as the protagonists try using the train to ram the boneless, which also, by the way, casually manifests as the old Smackdown fist. You know, as you do. It feels so climactic and high stakes as Rigsy pleads with Clara to let him ram the train, even though they both know it means certain death when they can keep the lever in place with a regular hairband. I feel like this shows Rigsy's desperation to make something of himself. He's so used to Fenton talking down to him and telling him he's nothing that part of me wonders if he actually wants to die, and that's why he's so reluctant to let Clara talk him down. So it makes for quite an emotional moment. It also further shows Clara's unique style of being the Doctor, because I can guarantee that the 12th Doctor isn't carrying hairbands around in his pocket, so he would probably let Rigsy sacrifice himself here.
You really do throw your companions into the deep end, don't you?
It's also during this climax of the episode where the narrative starts to really play with the dimensions of the boneless, becoming three-dimensional and trying to maintain this horrific attempt at looking human. The villains become a whole new level of terrifying when they assume this form, flickering and glitching around while stumbling along like zombies wearing the faces of other people. They're so unbelievably creepy, and any flaws of the infamous BBC budget actually make the effect so much more nightmarish. The stuttered, awkward movement and dodgy rendering only serves to further emphasize how alien and unfamiliar the Boneless are as monsters, because they don't know how to appear as human. It's a truly impressive visual, and McKinnon's direction stops these 3D Boneless from outstaying their welcome. The direction keeps them mainly in the dark and maintains their sinister effectiveness as they advance on the protagonists like a horde. It's not really a visual effect that would work as well if we could see them in full daylight, so it's better to keep them in the dark here. The monsters being 3D also gives them the ability to change the dimensions of other objects, immediately rendering the Doctor's revolutionary dimension-changing 2-disc device absolutely useless.
No, 2-disc. It's called the 2-disc. Why don't even bother?
There's something scarier about the Boneless having this ability because there's no way to escape them. They become even more relentless and unstoppable. How do you fight back against a villain capable of manipulating the very ground you're standing on? Well, one of the main things Clara has learned from the Doctor is how to use a villain's ability against them, and I love how this happens in Flatline. Throughout the episode, Clara thinks and acts like the Doctor, getting everyone from place to place using any means necessary, even if that means a lot of lying, such as her absolutely terrible lies to Danny. But lying is a survival skill, as the Boneless find out the hard way. I absolutely adore how they use Riggsy's art to create a fake door to trick the Boneless into charging up the TARDIS. Logically, it basically makes no sense, but it's easy to overlook that because of how well it works within the narrative. Because the Boneless think it's an object they can restore to 3D, they keep pumping it full of their Sith lightning. But obviously you can't restore an object that was never 3D to begin with. It's funny how Matheson literally took inspiration from Looney Tunes for this, specifically the Roadrunner cartoons, where Wile E. Coyote would always create these fake tunnels and facades to trick the protagonist, but then he'd just run right through it anyway. Despite the unconventional source of inspiration, it's such a satisfying way to defeat the monsters and turn things against them, and it's the perfect climax for the episode. And of course it gives us the absolutely incredible 12th Doctor speech as he triumphantly returns from the brink of defeat to once and for all banish the villains. I love how he acknowledges that he still doesn't know what the Boneless' intentions and motives are, but they've chosen their role through their actions. It's essentially his way of saying the Boneless made their bed and now they have to lay in it, because they made themselves the villains. They're playing their role as the villains, so the Doctor has to play his role as the hero, whether they want it or not.
This plane is protected. I'm the Doctor.
After all is said and done, there's one last lesson to come from the episode. Upon reuniting, the Doctor and Clara discuss her ability to be the Doctor, since he was able to follow her all the way, even when he was in siege mode and could barely see anything on the view screen. He almost can't admit it, but he's proud of her, seeing how far she's come as a person.
And you made a mighty fine Doctor.
However, this is a bit of a double-edged sword, because he can already see the recklessness creeping in. The 12th Doctor knows he's the first of a whole new, possibly unlimited cycle of regenerations, so he's able to throw himself around without much fear of consequence, because he's emboldened by this lack of mortality. Clara, however, cannot do this, since she's very much human and only has one life, so it would obviously concern the Doctor that she's starting to pick up on this bad habit, something that ultimately costs her everything much further down the line. Unfortunately, this isn't really the focus of the final scene, since it instead has the Doctor claiming that goodness has nothing to do with Clara being good at his role. This would work if she had to make the same kinds of sacrifices he does, but she doesn't, at least not in this episode. Sure, she lies a lot, but nothing in the episode really sets her up for this sudden moral quandary.
You were an exceptional Doctor, Clara.
Thank you.
Goodness had nothing to do with it.
If anything, Clara's actions throughout Flatline completely contradict this sudden idea. She does manage to be both a good person and a good Doctor. She doesn't manipulate or use the side characters like the 12th Doctor has been doing in Series 8. So it's so bizarre to suddenly bring up this idea of morality. It's just kind of a disappointing way to end Flatline, considering all the great character work it had been doing throughout. It comes up with such interesting ideas about what it takes to be the Doctor, and how Clara is more like him than she'd like to admit. But it's as if the conclusion is from an entirely different episode. Series 8's focus on the responsibilities of being the Doctor is a brilliant through line, but Mummy on the Orient Express handles this so much better in my opinion. Episodes like Kill the Moon saw the Doctor trying to brute force this lesson to Clara, pushing her headfirst into difficult scenarios and impossible choices, causing tension between them, only for her to learn it properly in Mummy on the Orient Express because she can see the Doctor's thought process. It contextualizes things for her, and then Flatline gives her first-hand experience in the Doctor's shoes, but the conclusion conclusion doesn't fit the narrative. This isn't a Clara who allowed Riggsy to sacrifice himself. She doesn't willfully use the community service workers as experiments to test the abilities of the Boneless. Even her way of defeating the villains doesn't really put anyone in any more of a risk than they were already in, so it doesn't make sense for Flatline to suddenly turn around and say Clara acted differently or colder than usual, because she just doesn't. In my eyes, this is the only real problem in Flatline, because it's a complete 180 out of nowhere and doesn't really make any sense, kind of causing the episode to fall a bit flat in the final scene. No pun intended. Flatline is good. Oh, it's very good. Very rarely can a Doctor Who episode come along and explore so many different concepts so expertly and without any of them feeling underexplored. We get the grounded everyday setting of a bland council flat turned upside down by the revolutionary monsters, the Boneless. Seriously, these belong in the upper echelon of high concept Doctor Who villains. Taking the simple concept of art coming to life and running with it. I adore the slow burn mystery of the monsters as their dark nature is gradually revealed over time, with the visual effects bringing them to life so effectively. The Boneless are surreal and beyond comprehension, and I genuinely think the visuals of the episode communicate that with ease. I'm not sure I'd ever want to see the Boneless again, not because they're bad, but because a further appearance would pale in comparison to this. But as it is, they're a standout part of Flatline and make it so incredible. There's also the excellent usage of the Doctor and Clara, separating them to flesh out Clara's growing independence and Doctor-like traits as she takes over his spot as the charismatic hero. Coleman delivers one of her best performances in the show, and the comedy between her and Capaldi is once again top notch. Flatline gets a respectable A grade on the Series 8 tier list. I'd happily give it an S rank. But the epilogue really lets the episode down by fumbling the character story of the lead duo, drawing the complete wrong conclusion. It's a shame because the character writing in general is really good, and the contrasting pair of Riggsy and Fenton are great side characters. All in all, you can't really go wrong with Flatline. It's such an impressive episode on all fronts, and it deserves the acclaim, which can't exactly be said of the episode after it. And an extra special thank you to my Bantam level patrons Fallon Cortez and Nathan Gibson, my Platinum level patrons Maximilian Foreman and Nick's Games, and all my Gold level patrons Boots, Calvin, Daniel Shilato, Francois aka Line Vortex, Herna Verzog, Tom Azar, and Tifa Simp. Thank you so much for your support.